Good morning. How we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome to episode 6 of my vlog. This one we are back in Orange City, Florida, playing some more 1-2. And just for the record, we're not going to be playing 1-2 forever on this vlog. I normally play 2-5 and some 5-10, and we're going to be doing that exact same thing slowly but surely. I wanted to put in about 10 sessions of 1-2. So if you're looking at this and you're like, why the heck is this person playing 1-2? You're a coach or an author. Why are you doing this? Well, it's largely for you guys. I know 1-2 is the most common level played, and if you are playing 1-2, hopefully this is exactly what you're looking for. There's not a ton of 1-2 and 1-3 representation in poker vlogs, and even less so when you're looking at the actual hardcore poker strategy of things. So hopefully this is what you're looking for, and again, we will be moving up slowly but surely. But with all of that said, in this session we're going to be looking at a bunch of small to medium-sized pots from a single session, and these are extremely important. These are the kind of spots that go overlooked a lot of the time when people are reviewing sessions, but I promise you, if you mess these pots up, if you size poorly in them, if you have wrong frequencies in them, if you exploit poorly in them, they are going to eat at your win rate and take a topside hourly, divide it in half, maybe divide it even worse if you're making mistakes in these kinds of pots. So let's start reviewing some situations, again, all from a single session, and let's have some fun with this one. All right, this first hand, we are under the gun plus a couple. Under the gun opens for $7. Call by the person next to act, and I decide to 3-bet up to 35 total, and obviously the 3-bet is totally standard, size is totally fine as well. I think some people would size this a little bit smaller, maybe in the 25-30 ballpark, but I promise you 35 is going to do just fine, and especially against these shorter stack sizes to begin with, this is a totally standard and fine thing. Totally fine committing preflop, and obviously if we end up getting called, whether it's by one player or multiple, it is going to be a smaller SPR and pretty darn basic and easy to play from there, whether we hit or we miss. So everyone folds around except for the under the gun original raiser. They call, next person folds, end up going heads up to the flop. They check, and I very quickly go all in. And villain pretty quickly folds, and this may be one that doesn't seem particularly interesting, but a lot of players, even on a board of 5-5-3, it is paired, it is low, there is a flush draw on it, might think, well, maybe I should just check this behind instead. But given the SPR, I mean, it's roughly 1, give or take, a little bit under 1 actually, given our opponent's exact stack, this is one where it is so much better just to shove this rather than check, and what are you going to do if you miss the turn and they shove into you? And also, this is just kind of like the greatest board in the world because it whiffs all of their kind of double Broadway hands like ace queen, king queen, ace jack suited, all that kind of fun stuff. So sure, you're going to get snapped off and you're going to feel like a real goofball when your opponent happens to have pocket nines and obviously snaps it on you and you have to try to get there. But overall, this is a very simple spot, one that you should definitely have memorized. And if you've never really worked with it, I would definitely suggest running a little bit of math on it. I won't waste your time with that right this moment. But in most scenarios, especially given the reminder that the double Broadway kind of hands, especially when you include the suited and the offsuit variant, makes up a much larger number of combos compared to pocket pairs. So you can get a tremendous amount of folds here, well more than half most of the time, and as such, I would definitely suggest going for the shove here rather than just going for the kind of more passive play or considering checking this. I really would not suggest doing that in the slightest, and there's no reason to make any sort of funky or different size bet. A shove is totally fine. And with that said, let's get on to hand number 2. So I just want to pause here and give a little bit of extra context about this session. When I got into the poker room, there was a full list for 1-2, jumped right on it, which means that a brand new table started very quickly. And I really hate opening tables in games and rooms that are very shallow. So the 1-2 game here is a 200 max buy. Not everyone buys in for 200, not everyone rebuys for 200. And opening a table in a shorter, more shallow environment is something that I definitely hate. So if I were trying to maximize my hourly, I probably would have just said, you know what, roll me, and instead of putting me on this table, just get me out of here or give me a table change when you can. But honestly, for you guys, I figured, okay, I'll just run this out. I already got my camera set up, and I just want to make sure that I get hands. I don't want to spend all day waiting on a list, so let's just do it. But if I were trying to maximize my pure hourly, I definitely would not have wasted my time, simply because even if, say, you work real hard, you double up, nobody's even close to you, especially if people aren't rebuying for max. They're not even buying in for max to begin. It's really not a great situation. So just keep that in your back pocket. So that's why some of these hands have a little bit more of a shallow stack vibe. It just simply is what it is when you're playing in this kind of environment and you decide to stick it through. So with all of that being said, let's jump on to hand number 2. Alright, a little while later, we are on the button, playing 6-handed, limp under the gun, look down at Jack 9 off. There's a limp under the gun +1, folds to us, and we attack 220. And let's just talk about this for a very quick moment, because there are essentially 2 different ways that 1-2 players tend to approach the situation. Option 1 is that if they do decide to raise, they are likely going to raise in the roughly $15 ballpark. Maybe it's to 12, maybe it's to 15, maybe it's to 17, 18, but you get the idea. It's typically in that ballpark. And what I would definitely suggest you consider is that $20 to $25 is a very real psychological price point for 1-2 players, and even a lot of 1-3 players, if I'm being totally honest. So if you can look at this situation and risk just a little bit more and get a ton of extra folds from it, that can be extremely, extremely good, rather than using the smaller size, typically getting action from 1 if not 2 people, and then all of a sudden you're in a very bloated pot. And I get it, we have Jack 9 offsuit, not a particularly strong hand, which means I'm totally cool if I get a ton of folds preflop. Which then brings us to option number 2, which is most 1-2 players will look at this and say, well, I have Jack 9 offsuit, and I'm just going to fold because it's a completely weak garbage hand. And totally understand that idea. But you have to keep this in mind. When you're playing 1-2, kind of an average decent hourly is going to be like $10 an hour. And that's not like average across all players, that's average across like most winning players. And the topside hourly for 1-2 is going to be around 20 an hour, give or take. So you may look at this spot and say, I'm contesting for $7 preflop. Who cares? And I get it, but you have to keep in mind that if you're able to pick up $7 uncontested a decent chunk of the time pre-flop, you're doing 2 great things. 1, you are picking up some money, and that's definitely padding your overall hourly, especially considering picking up just a couple of pots like this can pretty much be a decent size hourly. And then number 2, you get your VPIP up, so you're not looking incredibly nitty. So that's pretty good too. So given everything we just talked about, if you like this raise, give this video a thumbs up, and if you don't like this raise, leave a comment. Let me know exactly why, what you're thinking, and why you would just simply probably likely fold here instead, because I can't assume you're limping, right? Alright, so continuing on with the action, bunch folds, bunch folds, bunch folds, picking up a nice, easy, uncontested pot. No complaints. And I get it. If you're looking at this and you're like, this is not exciting, $7, I hear you, but honestly, this can totally change your hourly. And don't get me wrong, it's better that I have something like Jack 9 off than 9-4 offsuit, right? Or something completely garbage. Jack 9 can do some stuff if we end up getting action, and if we get action, it's likely only from a single person, especially given the dynamics in this particular table. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. Don't just look at a garbage hand and say, well, I guess I have to fold it. Look at the exact situation, think about what sizing can do in that situation, and then make a decision and go from there. And with that said, let's jump on to hand number 3. A little while later, we are in the hijack. Look down at Jack 9 suited, very pretty. Open raise to $6, which at this point was a pretty standard raise size for opening, was getting the job accomplished. Wasn't like you raise 6 and you get 50 callers every time guaranteed. End up getting called by the small blind and go heads up to it. Flop comes out ace, queen, jack with 2 clubs. I decide to fire this out for 10. Totally standard size, totally standard c-bet as far as I'm concerned. If we think about our possible options at this point, we could check behind here, and if we check the flop behind and face it on the turn, we're definitely continuing for at least 1, if not both. And I just think you get yourself in a lot of awkward spots versus fire here and likely going to end up checking a lot of turn cards behind and going forward from there, just based upon the way these kind of hands tend to play out on this kind of texture. And I just think overall, c-betting the flop and then check turn behind is going to be a little bit better rather than hoping to go for a delay c-bet or again trying to go for like call downs on turn and river induction. I just don't think that's going to be as good. So we end up getting called by our opponent pretty darn quickly. Turn is the 3 of diamonds. They check again, and I decide to check behind. Again, don't really see too much reason to barrel in this exact scenario. River is a 7 of diamonds, and they pretty quickly lead out for 25. And at this stage in the game, if we think about what our options are, it's not like great. Everything's on the table. You could definitely fold, you could definitely call, you could definitely come over the top, at least in terms of options that are available. I don't think hero calling this is going to be particularly good. I mean, you're really hoping that they have busted clubs, maybe 10-9, that kind of hand. But ultimately, you will definitely be getting value towned when they bet the ace. They probably won't bet the queen, so you can discount a lot of that. But given the fact that they are defending from the small blind for the smaller open raise size, I think pretty much every single ace is reasonably in the range. Maybe not every single offsuit combo, but most certainly all the suited combinations. And there's tons of those combos, and are there enough busted club and busted draw combos? I don't think so. You could consider going for a raise. Given the exact stack sizes, though, it'd pretty much have to be a shove or something close to it in order to probably generate enough folds or even get them to consider folding. And, maybe you get hands like ace 5, ace 6, and maybe even like ace 9 to go away. And that's totally fine and something to consider. The issue is it doesn't look particularly real. Like, would you really do that with a nutted hand very often? Are you really checking that turn behind with a nutted hand very often? It just doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. So again, some players, sure, I definitely might consider it, but I don't think calling's going to be great. Don't think shoving's going to be great. And as such, the only real option left is just to say forget it and find the fold button, say nice hand, and move on. So hopefully that helps. Let's move on to the next hand now. So quite a while later, we are in the big blind. There's a limp. There's a raise to 5. One call. Small blind calls 2. I decide to defend this as well, and this is pretty darn loose. This is obviously not a great spot to be in, but decide to defend from the big blind anyway for a few extra bucks. Flop comes 6-5-4 with 2 hearts. Check to me by the small blind, and I decide to fire out for 10. And if you've seen other my vlog episodes, you notice this is something that I definitely tend to do. A lot of leading in multi-way pots, and this is one that I think is going to do just fine. End up betting again for 10, get a few callers, small blind goes away, and we end up going 4-way to a turn. Turn is the ace of clubs. And I decide to check. Now, I know some people might look at this and say, well, this should definitely be a bet, and I totally understand. I think this probably is a bet in a decent amount of scenarios. However, one of the things I'm looking at here is if I bet and get shoved on, simply because, it is a pretty bloated pot at this point. If I fire here for 30 or 40 and end up getting shoved on, we're really in that awkward territory where it's probably a call, but not really looking forward to it because I don't think anyone is shoving second best on me at this stage in the game. Nowhere near enough of the time, especially at this limit. So I'm not really looking to play for stacks right this moment. So I'm totally fine if we check here, face a smaller size bet, and also if we check, face a bet and a shove in front of us. One of those situations where we can probably just get away from it right that moment. Again, those commitment ranges in situations like this at 1-2 tend to be so very well defined, and a7 here is just in a world of trouble if stacks start going in. So anyway, as it ends up rolling out, there is a bet from the original limper to 16, call by the raiser, and I decide to call after 1 fold. 16 is obviously a very small size, and at this point I'm feeling pretty darn confident in my hand. Turn is the king, river is the king of diamonds. I check. The limper checks, and the original preflop raiser fires for 50. So I decide to cut out the call here, and this is one of those that probably looks a little bit weird, but we really have to think about this person. So when there was a limp preflop, they decided to attack to just 5. So probably not putting the absolute strongest of stuff in their overall range. Now, this is a room that has a pretty much ongoing high hand bonus, so sometimes people do weird things pre-flop in order to keep the most amount of people in, and sometimes they do weird things with their really strong hands. It is what it is. Sometimes you might run into something like Ace King that's just extremely bizarrely weirdly played here, or even, honestly, set of aces. But overall, I'm not super concerned right this moment. Sure, they can have hands that beat us, but it just doesn't make any damn sense. Because if they had a real monster, if they had a set, if they had two pair, if they had a made straight, wouldn't they have raised on the turn instead of just letting pretty much everything roll off possibly for free? I think so. I think there's plenty enough reason to believe that. And the $50 bet is pretty darn large size, all things considered, for 1-2 players. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense as like pure value. This doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense for really much of anything. And if it doesn't make sense for much of anything, then I just assume there's going to be like dumb airball stuff in here enough of the time to justify getting involved. And sure, sometimes I'm going to feel like a goober when he ends up showing me ace queen or something like that, but I think this is going to be fine overall. And because the original limper decided to check on the river, I don't think they have the strongest stuff. I don't think they have made straights or two pair or sets or anything like that at this point. I think they're going to end up going away a pretty good chunk of the time as well. So they end up folding. He ends up showing pocket threes. I show my ace and ship the little pot over our direction. Nice little one from there. And kind of an awkward spot, but yeah, his bet on the river, again, when something just makes zero sense whatsoever, I don't know. I tend to get a little bit sticky, to say the least. So let's move on to the next hand and go from here. A little while later, we find ourselves in early position with ace-10 suited. There's a $5 button straddle, and the small blind was purchased, so they decide to complete. Limp by under the gun, decide to raise to 25. Totally standard. I'm definitely not going to be limping this behind. I'm definitely not going to be folding. The size, there hadn't been a tremendous amount of straddle pots yet, so I thought 25 might do just fine. However, it seems like that wasn't the case, and maybe I needed to go a little bit larger since we end up getting called in 4 spots, so we end up going 5-way to an extremely bloated pot. Flop is 9-8-3 with 2 clubs, no spades, and I decide to check this when it checks to me. And I know missing sucks, missing in multi-way pots suck, missing in super bloated pots really sucks, but this is one where I can't imagine a flop c-bet is going to be lucrative or profitable for us, and I definitely would not want to fall into the trap of just over c-betting, especially in multi-way pots. So this is one where checking is going to be far better, and just don't talk yourself into over c-betting in multi-way pots, especially when there's 4 players. It's just typically going to be a massive burner. So in this exact situation, there is a bet by the button for 25 bucks, call by the small blind, fold by the big blind, and I end up folding. And it may not seem like a big thing. However, we have to keep in mind that at this point, given the pot is $125 to start the street, the bet is only $25 and there's a call, we're getting 7-1 on continuance here. And it seems super enticing to give action here. However, I don't think we can check shove and get enough fold equity. There are plenty of things that will definitely continue if we decide to check shove. And check calling is what a lot of players will actually consider doing here, and a lot of people would do it here, just simply because, well, I have overcards, and that's great, and I'm getting a really good price, and there's only one person behind me, and they're most likely not going to raise. So I get the overall appeal. However, you really have to consider that you're not drawing to the nuts. If you improve to an ace in the turn, is that really all that great? Same thing with the 10. So like your improvement cards aren't particularly great. Again, no real draw to the nuts anyway. So this probably isn't going to be all that good. So even though we do have a really good pot odds scenario, don't fall for it. Just get out of this pot. Folding is going to be just fine. I can't stress this enough. People just so heavily panic in these multi-way pots. Don't. It's very simple, and even though you're getting good pot odds, don't fall for the trap. Fold it, and let's move on. A little while later, we are in the cutoff. Look down at ace-queen offsuit. Very pretty hand. Say limp under the gun. New player looks down and raises to 5 total. I don't know if there was a memo that went out about raising a 5 over a limper. I have no idea. Still going to 3-bet to 25, but way, way, way better than flatting, by the way. Please do not flat this. Way better 3-bet. And the player who raised to 5 is made it very, very clear that they are supposed to be playing 2-5, and they are definitely above all of this 1-2 nonsense. So they check in the dark on a board of Ace King 10 with 2 hearts, and I announce a $20 c-bet. This is totally fine. Plenty of second best hands that can and will continue, from pair and draw to just things like King 9 to flush draws and all that kind of fun stuff, worse ace X and all that kind of stuff. So really not much of a question in terms of the overall bet itself, and he just ends up folding very, very quickly, pick up a nice little small pot, no problems. But definitely be on the lookout for these situations where you can 3-bet with hands that a lot of other players will consider just flatting with preflop. 3-betting can be way more lucrative, so definitely don't miss these kind of situations. The ranges over on Red Chip Poker, both in core and in pro, will warn you through what kind of 3-bet ranges you can look for in a situation like this, and again, Ace Queen is definitely going to fit that bill. So that's this hand. Let's move on to the next one. And not even 10 minutes later, we find ourselves on the button. There are 2 limpers. Look down at kings. No complaints. Raised to 10 by our 2-5 friend. Obviously going to be 3-betting this one. Go up to 35 total. And again, totally standard on the 3-bet, totally standard on the size itself. End up getting folds from the limpers, very, very quickly called by the 2-5 guy, who again decides to check in the dark. Flop comes out 10-7-3 rainbow, and take a moment before firing, and they just quickly shove it right in, never ever considering a fold in this situation. If he happens to have pocket sevens or something, good on you. But in this exact situation, he does not. He ends up showing, I believe, 9-7 of hearts and ship the little medium-sized pot over our direction. Very, very easy. And again, never, ever considering a fold, especially against this kind of player who's just very clearly thinks they're above the stake they're currently playing. Plus, all the other factors. It's a 3-bet pot, small SPR. Do not overthink this. Do not try to find some hero fold on 10-7-3 rainbow. It's just not going to happen. Get it in, feel comfortable about it, and if you're behind, suck out, or if you're ahead, hold. Can't complain about that. Now let's move on to the next one. So a couple hands later, we are in the hijack. Look down at Queen Jack off. It's a limp. Decide to attack it to 15. Against a single limper, I'm totally fine with it. Again, the conversation earlier was largely about against multiple limpers. So we end up getting a couple more colors than I expected. I get called with a button, both of the blinds and the original limper as well. Flop comes 10-9-3 rainbow. Everyone checks to me. I take a moment and decide to fire for 25. And you can make an argument for just checking this as well, but I thought that this was going to be a little bit better in the context of game flow and just kind of make decisions and go from there. So button decides to shove for 41 total. Small blind thinks for quite a while before eventually folding. Get called by the big blind, who is a very, very weak player, and a fold from the other person. So double check that we have the draw that we think we do, and obviously not going to be folding at this point. And our opponent in the big blind does not have very much stack left. So at this point, it's going to be a pretty simple play out from here. Turn is the 4 of spades. Decide to check behind after they checked, and river, no complaints whatsoever, is the king of hearts, and I decide to put them all in. And they call pretty darn quickly, and I believe table ace 9. So this is obviously a very nice result, not complaining about that river card in the slightest, and end up shipping the entire thing after the button mucks. The big thing though is that on that turn, do not punt in that last 25 bucks. Just take the draw for cheap, it's totally free, and run it out from there. Do not make the mistake of firing in those dumb draws in situations where you can draw 100% for free, and 2, there's probably zero fold equity in the world anyway. And just for the record, even if I improve to a queen or a jack on the river against that particular big blind, the last of it was also going to be going in for what it's worth. So one of the big things is if you get in the habit of playing draws aggressively, you might end up punting that turn. Don't. Just chill out, take the draw for cheap, hopefully improve like we did here, and then get the rest of it on the river when you do indeed improve. So that's this hand. Let's move on to the next one. This last hand of the night, we're playing four-handed as the table is winding down in the big blind. Cut off folds. Button is that very, very weak player I was talking about earlier. They decide to limp the button. Small blind decides to raise to 5. We have 6-4 offsuit and decide to call as well. Again, playing four-handed, and we're going to be getting involved with a very weak player a lot of the time. Yes, 6-4 is not particularly strong, but this should do just fine given the overall context of the hand. The flop comes out King 8-5 all hearts. We have the 6 of hearts in our hand and decide to fire for 7 after the small blind checks. I assume the small blind's going to let it go a lot of the time, button will continue a lot, and we'll just make decisions from there. Turn is the 7 of hearts, and I decide to fire for 10, which at this point you may be thinking, why the heck are we firing with the 6 of hearts when there are 4 hearts on board? Yes, we have a flush. It's a playable flush, but it's not particularly great. The real reason is a couple fold. One, our opponent is very, very bad, which means second best hands can and will continue. It's not like they're only going to continue if they have a heart in this scenario. It's just not the way this person had been playing. They will call for chops in situations where they are never ever really going to be chopping. And also, there's just a lot of value to be had here. They're never going to bluff raise me, and if I check, they're just going to check behind pretty much all the time anyway. So I can get a small bit of value both on this turn and also on the river a good chunk of the time if I use smaller bet sizing. Yes, I'm not going to be able to bet near pot and expect to get a tremendous amount of value, but smaller sizes against these specific kinds of players can do very, very well. So not shocking, we end up getting called. River is the 3 of hearts, and I decide to continue firing. And while it looks like I have a straight flush, I do not. So it probably seems a little bizarre, but again, not shocking that I'm going to get looked up by a second best hand from this particular opponent. They end up calling down with ace-5, no heart in their hand, and ship a nice one with a very, very silly little one. But again, when you're playing against these specific kind of opponents, you can get away with making these kind of plays, and you're never going to get punished, even though that small size looks a little bit silly and should get punished. It really never does against players just like this. So be on the lookout for spots like this in your game too. So the game ended up breaking a few minutes later, and everyone else decided to get reseated at another table. I just decided to say forget it, rack it up, and go home. And for what it's worth, this table really ended up breaking because a guy was angry that I was recording and decided to continue leaving to go complain to the floor. And again, the floor says that it's okay that I record, so sorry, but good job in the meantime breaking the game because you have a problem with it. So after a short 2-hour session, ended up bookmarking a 361 profit for 181 an hour. Clearly not a sustainable win rate at 1-2, but I'm not going to complain about it in the slightest either. So hopefully you enjoyed a lot of these kind of small to medium-sized pots. Yes, there were 1 or 2 big ones, but honestly, these small to medium-sized pots are the win rate makers or breakers. If you're not careful in them, if you mess up your frequencies or your ranges or your sizing in them, you are going to be very upset at the end of the day when you're constantly questioning, why aren't I winning at the top side of my hourly? A lot of the times, the leaks aren't really in the massive, massive pots. It's in these small to medium-sized pots. So make sure you're paying attention to them when you're studying your own hands between sessions. And if you really want some help in these small to medium-sized pots, I would highly suggest checking out Core from Red Chip Poker if you haven't already. redchippoker.com/core to check it out, but really this is the most comprehensive poker course ever created. Has everything you need, an excellent, excellent syllabus, tons of lessons, and also pre-flop ranges, as well as everything you need post-flop from the math, from the overall playbook, and an excellent course for live cash game players as well that I would definitely suggest checking out in its entirety. Runs you through a tons of the skills you need and the mindset you need for things like 1-2, moving into 2-5, and also a little bit of 5-10 as well. Again, that's redchippoker.com/core to get started, enroll today, and start doing a couple of lessons every day, and trust me, it's massively going to benefit you at the end of the day. And that is going to be a wrap on episode 6. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you have any comments or questions, please do not hesitate to let me know, and I look forward to seeing you back in a little while with episode 7. In the meantime, good luck out there, and happy grinding.